You were the first person born in your family in Boston, in the
Yeah,
US, correct?
my
So
sister and I, yes, it has been even those conversations, right? Having to, which is it's insane because then I also form a part of a community of like this immigrant community. So I
mm,
have constant duality of like, yes, I am American, but I'm also pulling into this immigrant community where my mom and my grandmother, my aunts and uncles, they're now having to reconcile at a much later age. Like, what is this America? What is this American dream? And
hello and welcome to At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform that brings together people from a diverse background of lives, careers, and experiences who all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of finding and raising their voices to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium holds a space for everyone to share their stories, to be heard, and to bring us inspiration. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with Yissel Guerrero. Yissel Guerrero is a first-generation Bostonian born and raised in Dorchester by an immigrant single mother who refused to accept anything less than the best for her girls. Through divine intervention and hard work, she has become a chameleon, flawlessly navigating different environments and enjoying interacting with people from all walks of life. She is one semester away from completing an MBA degree in social impact, which she plans on using to step into and create generational wealth for her community. After graduating from Emory University in 2016, she had the pleasure of serving in the Marty Walsh administration for 4 years, learning the true meaning of public service and advocacy. She served as the mayor's liaison to numerous neighborhoods in Boston, including some of the most affluent neighborhoods in the city and others less so. She also served as the State Government Liaison and was responsible for managing the city's interactions with the state legislature. In 2021, she switched careers and stepped into the hospitality industry by coming to lead membership recruitment for the Quinn House. It is her sole mission to create space for as many diverse and dynamic people to be a part of her community and to feel at home. We'll see what's about to happen next, as Drake says. Okay, Yissel, welcome to At the Podium.
thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a long time coming. I'm so glad to sit down with you. Now, we met when I moved to Boston almost a year ago. It's been a year ago since I had first moved to Boston, and we worked together. And I remember the first day we met, I was so impressed and continue to be impressed by the passion and the true believing spirit that you bring to the work that you do, which is not easy and which is rare. So I'm so happy that the world's going to get to hear a little bit of that from you today.
Thank you. I'm humbled. I'm humbled to be here.
A big part of your career has been in advocacy and government. And I want to know what drew you into public service and how did you transition from college into the Marty Walsh administration in Boston?
That's funny. I always say Jesus bamboozled me. I seriously, I did. I had declared a major in poli sci in undergrad at Emory, and my idea was actually going into international affairs. Studied abroad in Switzerland. The whole idea was that I would be some diplomat of sorts. And
Mhm.
someone said, "You really want to see government at work? Start at the local level. You can really see policies implemented and how they affect people's lives." Kind of went over my head, kept it in mind. I went back home mostly because I didn't get a job after college. And it was a really sort of difficult time. And so I'm like in the pits, and my mom is kind of watching me go through this search. And she kindly just sat me down. She said, "How is it that you studied politics, but you're not necessarily doing much with it?" And it was around the time that Hillary Clinton was running for president. So she's like, "It doesn't make sense. Pick one." As a way to spend time with her, I was like, "All right, let's volunteer. Let's be civically engaged." So I'm like doing this thing with her. I was volunteering with my church, and my pastors had asked me to be the liaison for the church. because he couldn't be everywhere at the same time. And we needed to sort of build our relationships with different stakeholders in our community. So I ended up reaching out to this Office of Neighborhood Services. And really from a cynical perspective, because my church is based in Roxbury, one of the underserved neighborhoods in Boston. And I wanted to know what that office was doing to serve the neighborhood because I wasn't seeing those resources. Reached out to a couple of them. I think like one or two liaisons reached out. They had an opening. So I was like, all right, let's see what happens. So I applied. And then I was serving with my mom and the group of volunteers. We ended up in New Hampshire, our nearest swing state. The way the world works, I ended up with all of like Marty Walsh's people. He was putting his political power and his support behind Hillary Clinton at the time. So like the two things just sort of came together. And somehow they were like, you ask hard questions. Why don't you come see what it's really about? So I ended up serving as Mayor Walsh's liaison to Back Bay, Beacon Hill, Mission Hill, and Fenway, and everything in between.
So had you not have gone up to New Hampshire to stump for Hillary Clinton, you would not have had that intersection happen with Walsh people.
100%, because it's two worlds that are intertwined. But when you serve in a political administration or for the city, it's not required for you to also be involved on like the political side of things. There's the 9 to 5 job. You are showing up to do a job, and then you're volunteering. So for me, it was just like, okay, I have interest in serving people and then also being civically engaged. For the role that they were looking to fill, you kind of had to be able to do both and manage both.
They were very smart at keeping the political work separate from the work of running the actual city. And then
Oh, they had to.
by law, is that by law or is it about that they have to keep that separate?
Yeah, they definitely have to because there's conflict of interest. So there's like the politician who's constantly running and then sort of showcasing his platform. And then there's the actual office itself. So you don't commingle funding, you don't commingle those resources. If I, on my spare time, want to volunteer for any political candidate, I can do that. But when I show up as the political appointee of, in this case, Mayor Walsh, I'm there to do a job. They do keep those separate.
Did the actual work that you were doing in the Walsh administration match up to what you studied at Emory, or was there a difference?
It was so much more than I could have imagined because I think the good and the bad of college, I think it's important for all of us, but it's very theoretical. So I was learning a lot of this, the policies and the game theory, which good and great. But then when I'm there with someone, it's like you have to just learn the skills on the go, and they're all people skills. There were many things that no one could have taught me in college that I just learned while doing the job. Wonderful mentors along the way, but it was that message came back. You want to see something really implemented, start at the local level. We got to see our programs, from a legislative proposal to really how it trickled down into the community, and how it did affect people's lives. So that was eye-opening and humbling every single day.
You're the liaison to these different communities, very different neighborhoods in Boston. How do you take those concerns, those needs of those various communities, put them together, and then pitch that, I would suppose, to the administration to get action on what those citizens are requesting?
The very first thing that we were told coming in, or one of the first things that we were told many things coming in, is that you are a bridge. It is your job to sort of distill the administrate. You are a representative of the administration. Government's hard to navigate as is. So my job was to bring in our message from the administration, make it, digestible, if you will, make people understand, let them have an in, and then vice versa. My job was to be out in the community, to know every single stakeholder that I could, whether it was a business owner or a civic association, get to know what their concerns were. For me, it was important because I had such different and diverse neighborhoods to say, I may not understand what you're going through, like those aren't my issues, but in this moment, that is the most important thing to you. And now I've heard it multiple times. So now it's like a trend in this neighborhood. Okay, this could be an issue. Let me then report that either to the department that could address the issue, or we had means and processes to be able to notify the mayor directly. And so that was something that we had to brief him on. And that communication was ongoing every single day.
Because the neighborhoods were so diverse, did you ever find issues or challenges that were consistent between those different neighborhoods?
Everyone cared about quality of life. for sure. And everyone wanted to see change. It was just not change in their particular area. I think across the city, we live in Boston, right? So across the area, it was there's too much development. But wait, we need more resources. But
Mhm.
no, wait, those that development is helping fund a lot of the resources that we need, and so there was too much traffic. I think in 2019, we definitely got voted the city with the worst traffic. I think it's only gone downhill from there. Overall, everyone really cared. I got to meet people that really cared about their neighborhood, different as they were, and they just wanted to make it a safer, more enjoyable place for them to kind of grow out their families and extend it further on. So that
Mhm.
was nice.
So you're there in the heart of it, like you're literally pounding the pavement, I would imagine, sometimes in Boston. Do you think that government can truly work for people, or is it too controlled by special interest and people driven by power, financial gain?
You're tugging at both of my heartstrings. Because yes, I want to say it absolutely works because I've seen it work. The pandemic was one of those times when we stopped absolutely everything that we had to do, and I saw laws go from being proposed to pass at the state level and then implemented at the local level. Like we all had to work together and work together fast, one for everyone's sake, and two to keep people alive, and we did. We sort of stopped with the ceremonial acts, if you will, that in many ways keep our government in place, but I've also seen it work. I think it's what drives one, the frustration, and two, the passion to keep going.
Mhm.
Do I think it's very much controlled? Yes. I think it's still a system that has been created that is actually working as it should. It's just that we also have people on the outside there saying we don't have to abide by that, and we're going to make government work for us as well. So it's sort of, I think it's going to be an ongoing issue and struggle, such as life. But I think it can work, and it has to. Because I don't think there's any other authority or authoritarianism, if you will, that is going to work for our society.
But you see this rise of authoritarianism across the globe. Why do you think that's happening?
I can tell you why I don't think it'll happen, why it can't happen here, and it's the
Right.
fact that we are the very basis on what our nation was created on, right? Like we were going to be this melting pot of everyone has to have a say, everyone's coming from all over. Other nations have been established for years, decades. We are sort of like the new kid on the block that's saying, okay, well, we're going to play by our rules. There's that would be the dismantling of, I think, the US, the core of who we are as a nation, to say, no, democracy is no longer going to be the thing that sort of binds us together.
Do you think we're touching that envelope of stepping away from those principles in our current political dialogue?
I think with 2020 specifically and seeing sort of the protests that were happening, I remember being extremely engaged, outraged. I was mourning, I was grieving, I was a whole host of things I think a lot of people around the world are feeling as well. But then it dawned on me in having conversations with other more senior staff in the administration that they were sort of like, we've been here before. And it was a civil rights movement. And so it's more of like the waves that come and go that are a part of our history and a part of what makes this sort of government operate. There are always these ebbs and flows. And so I don't think that we're any closer. I think a lot of the fear kind of coming out of that same 2020 wave was, are people going to tire out? Are the protests will eventually die down? Yes, we'll see some changes in policy maybe, and even at the small, at the business level, but then eventually people are going to go back to a norm of sorts. And I think that's sort of where we are until the next big wave comes and we're back on the streets and we're back protesting and some change will happen. And I think that's necessary, but I don't think that we're at the point of a civil war yet, if
Mm.
at
So much of the country was founded on this idea of revolution, right? And this idea of breaking norms. But I'm wondering if we are in a time where we are shaping a new norm for what it means to be American and for what democracy looks like. And we could definitely be in a moment when that shift is happening.
And I think it is. I will say, I think I'm fortunate that I get to live and be a part of a generation that I think is helping push that change, where we're kind of not, where we're saying it's not enough anymore. Looking around even the protests and stuff that were happening, a lot of the people that were driving, that were shifting this energy were my generation and maybe even the millennium. Well, who if I'm the millennial, what is it? Gen Z after?
Yeah, it's alphabet soup. X,
Oh my God.
Y.
No, like even in conversations with that next generation, they're like, no, we're not gonna put up with it. I get to live out the change that people before me didn't have the rights to have. And so that's just going to continue. I think we will see openings where there weren't any. Will we have a perfect society? No. I wish, but no.
Mm.
But I think that that will continue to push our way through and to create something that is more acceptable. And we do see it, right? We're growing up in a generation where, in my case, like I remember high school, I had classmates that were becoming transgender, and sort of it was a new concept for us at the time, but one that was acceptable. I'm sort of growing up in a time and a place where that's a norm. That's totally fine. I don't question it. I have no issues with it, which is maybe different than the generations above us, but this has always been around. I'm hopeful.
I'm very hopeful. I always say that, and maybe you have a different perspective on it because I've never worked within politics. I've always been more on the corporate business side, But I think when I look at what's happening, as distressing as it is, the hope that I have is that politics, elections tend to be about the future, not the past, good or bad. It
Mhm.
seems that the idea of politics, elections is all about what are we moving towards. And I think that gives me hope for what you just said, that your generation has been steeped in an idea of more equity, more inclusion, more people coming into the fold versus perhaps previous generations where people were being held out, where laws were being written to keep people from participating fully as themselves within the society that we're creating. I think perhaps that's the challenge, the tension that we feel right now is that we're really in the midst of that struggle. We're really in the midst of that change. And it's kind of on time if you think about it, Giselle, because if we think of the biggest social disruption that happened, the biggest social change that happened being the end of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, we've sort of been in this 50-year time frame to where we're almost due for a re-examination, a new way of thinking about how we as a society are going to live together, all being sped up by the fact that we all have access to the internet, to information that we wouldn't have had access to even 30 years ago.
100% agree. It's like I said, I'm fortunate just because I feel like I'm in the process. And another 40, 50 years, beyond that, I'll be able to look back and be like, oh, this is what history actually looks like at that point. When it becomes history, I'll be like, oh, I remember being in the midst of that process, if you will. Where right now we're sort of, when you're in it, you can't really see the full picture. We just have to keep pressing forward. But we're seeing again just shift in our work environments, shift in day-to-day conversations, even at home. I'm fortunate that my family is very close. I've got multiple generations, and we're able to sort of poke holes and, well, what was it like when you were coming in? What conversations were you having at home? And we get so caught up in what we're going through that it's kind of hard to understand that, one, there's a lot of it just continues, and it will continue to move forward.
You said something very interesting, that you're multi-generations of one family in one house, but then your mother comes from a different country altogether. You were the first person in your family born in Boston, in the
Yeah.
US, correct?
My
So,
sister and I, yes, it has been even those conversations, right? Having to, which is it's insane, because then I also form a part of a community of like this immigrant community. So I have this constant duality of like, yes, I am American, but I'm also pulling into this immigrant community where my mom and my grandmother, my aunts and uncles, they're now having to reconcile at a much later age. Like, what is this America? What is this American dream? And we have arguments in this household. Ooh.
I don't doubt that. I know you. I know you have lots of thoughts about stuff.
But it's it's humbling because I have a mom and my aunts and uncles that came here because they believed, and in many ways their truth is that America is supposed to be a better place for them. It has afforded them more opportunities that I get to live in, and then I'm sitting here almost ungrateful to be like, yes, but I demand more because I know what this country has to offer, and it has to offer you as an immigrant population. I know that it can do more for us, and that has always been a part of my identity, this sort of duality in everything that I do. Um, Even the very same neighborhoods that I covered, right? I used to call them the rainbow. I had some of the most affluent, if not the most affluent neighborhoods in the city of Boston, paired with, on the other end of the spectrum, one of the most underserved. Just happened that that one underserved neighborhood was surrounded by leading institutions, hospitals, and universities. And so we sat here with this question of like, how is this still a possibility? And that's just one neighborhood. Imagine a household.
That question of how is replicated throughout the country because we live such separated lives so close to each other. And I have to say, when I first moved to Boston, Boston is known for sometimes having very difficult social interactions between different neighborhoods, different ethnicities, different socioeconomic classes of people. And I remember moving to Boston and just being in my mind, because I'm from Texas and everything is so spread out, that you
Mhm.
could be 40-minute car rides from people who live in very different circumstances than you, that you don't even see it. But I
Mhm.
was struck in Boston at how close everything is and how that impacted some of the social challenges that Boston is sometimes known for. It really struck me as interesting that they were that close to each other, yet so separate from each other in some circumstances.
It's one of the things that pains me of the city, and actually it actually took coming back home, working for the city of Boston, to start to appreciate the fact that people do show up to work every single day because they care to make it a better place for others. I've always had, and I always say this, I have a love hate relationship with the city that's made me. But in many ways, I think Boston still has the same way that I feel about America. I think Boston has a lot more to offer. We are a leading nation, we are a leading city. We're also one of the oldest cities in the US. So I'm kind of like, that means we've had more time to get this right. Leading institutions, but we still have to reconcile with the fact that we have a brain drain right now. A lot of our people of color, our leaders of color, young professionals are migrating down south to other cities. And until we sort of buckle down and choose to face that and address that by creating community, creating spaces for people to just come together and let go of our titles, let go of our pedigree, we're going to continue to see it. So,
It's interesting because when I was in Boston, brief though it was, I was very impressed by the level of excellence among the people of color in Boston. And I thought, especially your generation, the younger generation, was really about trying to make social change and really about trying to affect positively um, some of the issues that we're talking about for the broader culture. I was really excited about that in Boston.
and I will say it's been, as a person of color, surprising to us. And I think that shift we're starting to feel mostly after 2020, if you will, where we were sort of like, no, this is also our city, and we're tired of feeling like we're other at home.
Mhm.
Let's start to showcase the fact that we have elite or just people of color that are excellent. So instead of having it be, what's the word? There's always a word for it. I always like to say, like, we're not, it shouldn't be surprising to see people of color thriving. We exist in excellence because we are, and we've been doing this. So this conversation of a new Boston, I'm always like, that's not real. There is no new Boston. We've always been here. We've always been great and excellent and elite. We're just choosing to say no more. Let's gather, let's be visible, let's take up space. And sometimes that comes with pushback from the very neighbors that we share the space with. We're just going to continue to show up and be great.
We don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. Giselle, you mentioned earlier, we were talking, you mentioned the pandemic in 2020, which was, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, COVID, such a very fertile time in the country and the world. But you have a very unique view on it because you were sitting in the seat of government for Boston during all of that. And I wonder, what was that like for you to be serving in the government when we were having one of the greatest social crises of our time, not just on the health front, but on the social front, with all of the unrest that was coming because of the murders that were happening or being highlighted. Those murders have been happening forever, but were being highlighted during that time.
I debated saying this earlier because I remember, I'm going to say it, and Lord Secretary Walsh, please. I remember we had a meeting, and it was supposed to be a meeting of mayors from different cities and towns that were coming together to meet with the Speaker of the House. And just before we're going into the meeting, they all literally down to the minute, they're all getting phone calls. And it was the very first sort of like, oh, it's in our city. How many people do we have? Do we have to call? So like the meeting was called off in the moment. And these were the mayors of Somerville, the mayors, we had the Boston mayor. The same thing happened with the Speaker of the House. Like everyone in that moment was just like, hold on a second, everything has shifted. Yes, we have this plan. Yes, we have this legislative agenda that we have to move forward. And that's now been put on pause. One of the things that my pastor had always said to me as a reminder was like, you were chosen for such a time as this. And that just rung true to me all throughout the pandemic. I have to say it was the most humbling time. Not shocking. I was grateful that I got to serve under Mayor Walsh at that time. I think he was impeccable. I mean, the decisions that we made were first. We had no idea. There was no rule book. Absolutely no rule book. And the man was the first in the building, last in the building, every single day. At that time, I was serving as State Government Liaison. So I had front row seat to the pandemic and everything, but also like the way that two governments were working at the same time. I'm thankful for the fact that we had a great relationship with the state. People will always joke about Governor Baker and now U.S. Secretary Walsh's relationship, but the entire government, everyone was on the phone with each other. So for us, it was making sure, again, what programs do we have working right now in Boston that we have to share with the state to see if this could be implemented statewide for the safety of people. And of course, then we end up having to bear and deal with massive civil unrest. And at that time, we were still given space. I will be the first to say we had grandma, we had brought her back home. So the house is full. I'm the youngest in the house, and also the only person that's like, you guys know I have to go in and serve. Like I have to. Very few of us were there early on when we had to make kits, at-home kits, and instructions for people to make home like masks and stuff. At that point in time, we had no idea what was really going on with this pandemic. So we all showed up knowing and taking the risk that we could possibly die. If this thing is as bad as it is, we could all die. And every single person, most of them were department heads. The mayor was present. The Office of Neighborhood Services, the liaisons had all been sort of reported in as emergency essential staff. And we were there packing kits because we knew that at that point in time, this was what was necessary for the people of Boston. So for me, it will always be, yes, one of the hardest and most trying time, but also there was nowhere else that I'd rather be at that time. Like when those protests were happening, I made a personal decision at that point in time that I knew was a risk. But I said, I'd rather be out there. And if something happens to me out there, let it be out there than sitting at home and not and letting this moment pass by and sitting at home where my heart is there. So we went and we took to the street.
Where has that fervor and fire gone that we had when people were protesting in the streets around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor? Where has that fervor gone now?
I think it's there. It's there and it's showing up in quieter spaces. It's the same passion that fuels us, that made us take to the streets. But I think it kind of goes back to that conversation with the senior staffer that said, it'll pass. And when it passes, remember this feeling, because eventually the world will try to move on. The world will try to go back to business as usual. So I think it's still there, but out of preservation, some of us are choosing to remain quieter. There is strength in numbers. And so we're trying to figure out where that community still lies. We're showing up in different ways for each other, but it's still there.
How do you take the action of that time and turn it into legislation?
The legislation moves very slow. Oh, Jesus, very, very slow. During the protests, I'm thankful because now looking back and again being able to constantly just see the patterns, we had a state representative who was just always known for filing a set of bills that at the time maybe weren't moving as fast as we wanted to or weren't really going anywhere, but that was always his beat, um, putting bills up against police brutality, the body cams. There were a set of others. So because of what was happening with the civil unrest, all of a sudden it was the right time to then move to show we are as administrations, as government, we are committed. We have to fix this. And so then it was time to move those bills forward. We did see, I'm just trying to recall off the top of my head which ones I remember moving, but there was a maternal health bill that did get passed. Again, because trying to have this conversation about the fact that women of color have much higher mortality rates than others in this nation. A
Yeah.
conversation that we have to have. My sister, I'm always talking about my nephew, but that was a conversation that we had the burden of coming up with a birthing plan before going into the hospital, trying to talk to other women in our community to say, how do we ensure our safety? Because even though we have to be called in, we still need to make sure that we have everything that we can in place. They just passed, I think it was this past legislation, the Crown Act, now allowing for people of color to not be discriminated, or for just people in general to not be discriminated for hair. And I always talk about there's a very specific reason why I choose to not straighten my hair in any space that I'm in. I'm always or usually in predominantly white spaces. I do this on purpose. I remember having the fear when I first came into government of feeling like, is it going to be too much? Am I not professional?
I mean, what a gift that you had the opportunity to be sitting in those spaces at that time and really seeing the government, the systems work.
I knew that I was there for a reason. And at that time, that's what it called for. Even if at that moment it was putting myself on the line or feeling like parts of myself were, on fire.
And why did you choose to not stay in government? I know Mayor Walsh ended up going to Washington and becoming Secretary Walsh. You have come into the private sector. How has that transition been for you? Because it's a very different remit in some circumstances.
In some ways it's still the same, serving people and helping people. So the news is pretty much leaked. And we had just had this nice, like, hoorah moment with the entire administration. I think on the political side, we were getting ready. We were getting ready for round 3, and we were excited. We were definitely going to go in for another election year. And then we kind of found out that he didn't really have a chance to tell us. I think the news kind of all aligned. I was very, very fortunate to land this sort of new opportunity. I wasn't seeking it. And it came actually I cried. I turned it down a couple of times. And then I ultimately sort of felt peace. I felt at peace after speaking to my pastors, after putting this prayer out. And I'll say this. I had made a list of qualities that I wanted to have in my next boss. And I'm like Googling, and I come across this video. I think the Boston Chamber of Commerce were honoring Sandy and Paul. Oh my God. Every single word that I had written down that I wanted in these leaders, it's like, and this couple is known for X, Y. And I just started checking them off. Like, are you serious? So I took a leap. I took a chance. I'm here out of service and obedience to the Lord, but I'm enjoying every minute of it. So I definitely didn't plan it, but I'm glad that I stayed. I've learned so much. And even more, I'm getting to appreciate more of our city in ways that I don't think I would have had the chance had I left.
I want to switch gears a little bit because you have talked pretty openly about your journey with therapy and taking care of your mental health. And I applaud you for doing that because still today, Black and Brown people have such a difficult time even discussing mental health issues, let alone getting the help that they need around that. And I wonder, in your perspective, how do we move our communities past the stigma to give the support they really need to have a healthy mental capacity?
I had been talking about getting therapy for a couple of years before I finally went through it. So it takes doing it for you and then just encouraging and continuing to encourage those around you about the fact of just getting it. And it's demystifying in the same way. And this is what I sort of explain to people, my friends, my mom, my family, is that you go to see a dentist routinely, maybe not even because you have a cavity, but just because it's part of your like health checklist. If you're able to actually, if you have access and you're able to get the service, you get a physical every year. The same reason, just to make sure that everything is still functioning properly and that mental health is this therapy is the exact same thing. It's just someone that's specializing in your mental health and they're just checking. I think we often wait until we're at mental break, to then seek. At that point, you're at an emergency, but you can prevent that if you start going just routinely. So we've had those conversations. I think the really important thing for me was finding a therapist of color that would understand not just the social anxiety that I have, but someone that's going to understand the cultural piece, someone that was going to understand the spiritual piece for me. And the truth is we just don't have as many therapists of color. That's what makes it difficult for us. But for anyone that has access, I would say date. It's like dating. Find a therapist. If that one doesn't work for you, you don't have to stay with them. You don't have to stick with them, but go through it, because I think we definitely have trauma, and I think it's demystifying what trauma means. Like, we all carry it. We just learn to cope with it. And a lot of us, I can call it out, and a lot of my colleagues, we're just workaholics. We'll just work to mask whatever else really is going on and to achieve that control. But it's been life changing for me, I have to say.
You speak very openly about your faith, and I wonder what that journey into faith was for you, but then also how do you marry some of the challenges that can arise with a strong faith, particularly around women's rights to choose, gay rights, trans rights, all of the isms that
Mhm.
some in the church now are and always are eagerly embracing today?
We've always been spiritual. We grew up Catholic, and I remember going to mass and trying to figure out what the man up front, like, what is the Padre saying? I want to understand. I want to be in it. I want to drink the Kool-Aid, but I just don't get it. I don't get it. And then I remember there was a time period where then my mom had converted and started visiting a non-denominational church first. And for a solid 2 years, I fought her on it. Every Saturday, she would invite me. I'd say no, no. So much so that it got to the point where I said, "I'm glad you found your God thing. You don't need to shove it down my throat.
Keep your God thing over
Keep
there."
your God thing over there." And then I was invited once, and I felt it was like my hairdresser at the time. I felt bad saying no. The people pleaser hadn't gone to therapy yet. The people pleaser in me said, "All right, let me give this a go." I went, and it was the first time that I understood, that I could relate to what he was talking about football, but I could understand what he was saying. My pastor has always, always, always ingrained in us that faith is a individual journey, and
Mm.
has taught me about a God that loves everyone. So I've never had the issue with having, someone that is a homosexual, or women that have chosen to have abortions for whatever reason. Like, it's not my responsibility to have a say in this. Am
Mm.
I right? Probably not, because I probably sinned from the moment I woke up. So
Mm.
I've just been fortunate that my church is one that is very community driven. Our ethos is reach out, restore, and release. It's not about the Christian church, but you yourself as the body of Christ. And so I've had other friends that have at first approached me and been like, I was a little hesitant because you seem to be a Jesus lover. And I'm like, yeah, that is me. And I also love you too. Like, I'm your lover. Like, I just think I love people, and it pains me because I'm like, I've been able to receive such grace, such love, and I have this thing, if you want to call it, but faith is the thing that guides me, and it's worked for me.
Mm.
And I'm like, if girls could just experience that in their own way, that would be life changing. But of course, it's an institution that's also very outdated, very extremist at times, and it keeps people out, people that need and should have access to it.
So in your bio that you sent me, you quote Drake when he says, "We'll see what's about to happen next." So I ask you, what's about to happen next, Yissel? Or what would you like to happen next?
Oh, Lord, is my man gonna come from a UPS truck? Cause Lord knows. Um, what is about to happen next? For the first time, my next is living in this new place called now. I have been running this marathon. I have been running this marathon of always trying to get to the next, the next, the next. And this year alone has taught me to just, you're here is now. This is where I want you to be. And so that is my next. My next right now is, I've asked everyone, I'm going to ask you too. You know, we've talked about grad school is literally a few weeks from ending. Don't let me blow past this moment. I'm kind of numb, and it's a massive accomplishment. Everyone reminds me of it, and I'm sort of like, okay, I guess I gotta get the condo next. And I want to be comfortable with just celebrating and being happy right here, right now.
Yeah,
And
there's no pressure. No pressure.
Yeah, seeing what happens next. We'll see.
I love what you just said. The next thing is now.
The next thing is now. And I'm enjoying that, you know. Obviously, as you know, work brings very interesting people through, and I have an amazing team of people around me.
Yes, you do.
I'm really enjoying. And I'm almost like, I hate to admit it, but like I like this city. I like what I'm getting to do in this city. I like how I feel focusing on myself and myself alone, and sort of demystifying it's not being selfish. Like I deserve to love myself in all the ways, and to just be present. Existence is resistance. That's what I've said, I think, since graduating. You look perplexed. You want me to say it again?
Existence
Is
is
resistance.
resistance.
Resistance. It's what's led me to the health journey, the mental health journey, choosing myself over my partner, if you will. So we'll see what happens next.
I'm back on existence equals resistance. That's where I am. Yissel, thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate it. It's always a joy to speak with you. And I miss being able to see you every day.
I mean, Patrick, we can do this often. We can do No, you know, I called you 2 weeks ago and I was just like having someone that could understand. And, you know, we've always said like we're going to stay in touch. And so thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here and to share the space with you.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing this season without you. And I've had so many of your friends. I've had Derek and Jonathan and Connor Showen.
Yes.
So I was like, this panoply of amazing young people is not complete unless Yissel is sitting at this podium with me.
And on the throne with the king. No, it's been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm so proud of you graduating graduate school. That is not an easy feat.
It's been a journey, but one that I'm grateful for. It hasn't felt as, I mean, right now it feels painstaking. I'm like, why are these classes taking so long? But it's been I would have never imagined myself getting an MBA. That was supposed to be my sister's role. And here I am like, whew, how did that happen?
You're doing it. You're doing it. All right, Yissel, thank you.
Thank you.
And to those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Yissel.
Thank you, Patrick.